it's Nina. Thanks for joining me today. I'm going to be sharing with you how to use and assemble the Sweet Birds stamp set, which has coordinating dies and is exclusive to our Simon Says stamp collection. I'm going to start first by die cutting the coordinating dies that go with the stamp set into some white paper. This happens to be our Simon Says stamp 120-pound white cardstock. Works great for many different techniques, including stamping. The reason I'm going to die cut the images first is because I want to use these as a nesting guide inside of my stamping tool. I'm going to be using the Misty today. Before we start stamping, I did want to share with you that we have a downloadable PDF on our blog that helps you to figure out which images go together. Also pay attention to the fact that the stamp set has groupings. So you'll notice a black line surrounding the different sets of images. That's to indicate which images go together. So this stamp set is pretty simple to work with once you take a look at it and you see how everything is grouped together. I'm going to start first by stamping this cute little bird, and we're going to start by lining him up inside of his coordinating die cut shape, and that's going to help you position the stamp exactly where it needs to be to help build the image. So we're working with the top part of his body first. I'm going to stamp that image with some ink from Simon Says Stamp. We're using Pawsitively saturated ink throughout this stamping project. Once I have the top part of the body stamped, I will lift this off, and you can see we have it positioned perfectly within the die cut. I'm going to take the front part of his face next and nest that right into the previous image that we just stamped. This is a building set, different than a layering stamp set, which means these images puzzle piece together and create a beautiful image rather than actually layering on top of each other, which is a really great feature because that allows you as the artist to take these images and use many different colors rather than having to layer the colors on top of each other. You would have to be a little more selective on which colors you would use. These images allow you to use many different colors and create very colorful images. So after stamping the front part of his face, we're going to use this dark green color to stamp his wing and also the other end of his tail. I'll then pull out the shading portion of his wing and nest that around the first wing stamping. Because we're doing all of the stamping on the coordinating dies and we have them nested inside of the negative space of the paper, that's holding the die cut shapes in place. You could also use a sticky grid mat on the back side of your paper. There are many of those available, but it's not required. So you can see I'm not using one for this particular project, and I'm able to keep my images in the exact same place as I'm stamping. Even if they start to lift out of the negative area, just push it back in and it's still going to be in the exact same place that you had originally placed it. I'm going to go ahead and stamp his feet and beak next, and then finally we'll take his little eye. I like to use a clear block to stamp the eyes because they're small, so it helps me not have to fiddle with placing it. Instead, I can just stick it right on top of my block, stamp it down, and then we have this adorable little bird. So hopefully that shows you that this is pretty easy. Now we're going to walk through the rest of the stamping for all the other birds too. There's a total of 4 of them on this stamp set. Let's start with the cardinal next. I'm going to line up the main portion of the body into my die cut shape, pull out a nice red ink. This is our cherry color from Simon Says Stamp, and ink this up and stamp it on top of the coordinating die cut shape. Once I have that stamped, then I can work on the next portion of the image. So now we're going to fit in part of his wing and also the bottom portion of his tail. Once we have these areas lined up, I'll pick them up with the door of my Misty and stamp them again. Now I'm going to stamp this image actually a total of 3 times because I want this part of the image to be a little darker. And I didn't have a darker ink than cherry, but if I stamp this multiple times, it will intensify that ink and I get a completely different color. So that's a great way to be able to use images like this, and you want to have different colors throughout your stamping. Just stamp things more than once. You'll get that really nice dark impression like we did on the wing here. I'm using watermelon next to ink up his belly and the bottom portion of his wing. This is a nice combination between cherry and watermelon. And then I'm going to also use black from our Simon Says Stamp Intense black ink pad to stamp his face. There's also a space left behind for his beak and also feet, so we're going to make sure we stamp those as well. I used some latte ink from Simon Says Stamp to ink that up and stamp them down. Of course, we need to make sure we include his eye, so again, I'll pull in my clear block and our intense black ink to go ahead and stamp that down in the position that is left over for his eye. So now that we have our cardinal completed, we're ready to go ahead and set him aside and work on the next round of stamping. We're going to work with the blue jay next. I always like taking one of the images that lines up against one of the outer areas of the die cut and starting with that first, because starting from the edges in works a lot easier. And sometimes I don't have an ink color that's light enough, so I take the lightest ink that I do have and I use my blending brush to soften that ink color. So now I have a slightly lighter version of marine, and that gives me a nice light portion to add for his face and belly. I'm bringing in the top portion of his body next. This one I'm going to ink up with Cadet. This is a nice mid-tone blue, and it'll pair up beautifully with Royal. This is actually a trio of ink colors from our Pawsitively Saturated Ink collection. These three all work together really, really well. As with many of the birds, there are two portions on its wings, so we're going to start first with this one, and I'm actually going to stamp it with marine. But I didn't want marine to be too light, so I'm going to actually stamp it more than once. I'm carefully opening the door of the MISTI, trying to make sure not to disturb my image, but again, remember if it moves, you can always reposition it back inside the negative space of your paper. After stamping the wing, I'm going to bring in the darker section of his wing and also a stripe of color that goes around the front of his face. Both of these I'm going to stamp with Royal ink. I will stamp these twice to make sure I get a really dark impression, because I want to make sure that this is a super intense color. On the blue jay, there are two pieces that make up the tail. I'm going to take the piece that goes underneath of his wing first and ink that up with Cadet. Once I have that stamped, then I can puzzle piece the bottom layer of his wing and stick that right underneath and stamp it down with Royal. This creates a nice two-tone effect to his tail. I brought in his beak and stamped that with intense black ink, and then finally added his eye with my clear block. Here's the blue jay ready to go. These are really cute and come together so easily. And I encourage you to go ahead and use the color combinations that we've suggested, or what I'm using here today, which are very similar, and use these as a guide to when you first start using this stamp. Once you get the hang of it, then you can start changing up the colors and creating your own unique color combinations. I'm going to use this little cherub bird here. He's super cute. And I'm going to go ahead and stamp him with first Royal. Then I'm going to stamp the front part of his face with Latte. I stamped this version of Latte full strength, but you could have also used your blending brush to soften out that color if you wanted it to be a tad lighter. He has two different portions of his belly. The first portion is going to be your lightest color, and I used Lemonade for that. Afterwards, I brought in the shadow layer, and that piece I'm going to stamp with Sunbeam. And I'll stamp that one twice to also get a nice dark impression. This shadow layer tucks in nicely around the bird's wings and also the front portion of his belly. So it's really easy to line these up. Now you'll notice there are two spaces left behind for the other half of his wing and also the bottom portion of his tail. Both of these I'm going to line up and stamp with some Royal ink. That'll leave me with finally adding a beak and also his feet. And both of these I stamped with Cantaloupe ink. Now this bird is unique. He actually has a pair of eyes instead of just one. We're looking at him from the front. So this bird is unique out of all of these images in this stamp set. So I'm going to stamp his pair of eyes with the Simon Says Stamp Intense Black ink. And just look how cute. I love how chubby and adorable he is. So now that I have all of these images stamped, I'm also going to stamp coordinating branches and leaves. There are a pair of leaves in the stamp set and also one branch. And you can stamp these as many times as you need to create a nice scene for your birds. For my cards, I'm going to just stamp a single branch for each card. There are also coordinating dies for these branches and leaves, so I'll use those after stamping to go ahead and cut all of these images out. I used Latte for the branches, and then I used our Simon Says Stamp trio of green inks in Fairway, Field, and Sprout. These colors worked great for some nice rich greens. And for some of them, I did stamp them more than once so that way I could intensify some of the color and get some variations in the shades. I made a set of cards using the birds that we stamped here. As you can see, I paired them with the branches and leaves, and I added some stenciling in the background to create some scenes for them to sit on top of. Some sentiments from a variety of our Simon Says stamp sentiment sets worked great for adding little greetings to each of these cards. And then I also embellished each one with a few embellishment sequins. I hope this video has been helpful so that you can see how easy it is to stamp with our Sweet Birds stamp set. Don't forget there are coordinating dies for this set, which are great for not only helping you to die cut these images out and use them on a project, but it's also a great way to be able to use the die cut negative areas as a guide for your stamping. And don't forget, we also have a PDF download available on our Simon Says Stamp blog that you can use as a guide for stamping. Be sure to print this out so that way you can store it with your stamp set and have this to reference as you're creating. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I will be back soon with more to share with you all. Until then, please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any of our future videos. And I hope you all have a fabulous day. Bye!